Well, welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at shooting buildings and how to eliminate distortion, the linear distortion that we sometimes get when doing that. Now, quite often we'll shoot buildings with wide-angle lenses. We're sometimes quite low down to enable us to get everything in. And as a consequence, we get a linear distortion, which is where the bottom of the building is much larger than the top and it tailors off. Now, it's not all a bad thing, but sometimes you don't want that. Also, the building can look like it's falling over. So, to eliminate that, the way we're going to do it today is we're going to shoot the building with a wide angle, probably quite low down, and then we're going to take the image into Photoshop and correct it there. Now, another way of avoiding this problem, especially if you're serious about shooting buildings, is to buy a perspective control lens. Now, this is the lens that you can put on your camera, and it helps eliminate, you can adjust it to help eliminate that distortion. If you were a professional photographer doing architecture, a lot of these guys use, or certainly used to, use 5:4 cameras where you could adjust the back of the camera and adjust the perspective and correct for the verticals. I'm not sure how many people are still shooting film these days. There's still a few people out there, so that is another option, but it's not really probably an option for most people out there shooting as a hobby. So we'll go ahead, we're going to shoot this beautiful church behind me, and I'll give you a few tips on how we can shoot that, and also later on we'll go through the stages of correcting it. Now, another option we can do is to maybe move back further away from the church or your building and use a longer lens, or just zooming in. Now, what effect that does is compresses the perspective slightly, and because we're further away, we're not going to get so much distortion as we would do with a wide-angle lens. Now, that's not always possible. Here we've got a little bit of space around the building, but you're not going to have that option in a built-up area. But it's something to bear in mind. Also, by using a longer lens, we're not going to get perhaps the same composition that we would with a wide-angle lens. Maybe we want to include some foreground interest, and we're not going to be able to do that. But it's worth bearing in mind, and obviously if you can get higher as well and parallel to the building, that's also going to help you eliminate distortion. But again, we don't always have scaffolding or buildings we can climb up to be able to do that. But that's just another little tip just to bear in mind. Well, welcome back. We're back in the studio now. I've offloaded the files off the camera and converted them to Adobe DNG. And as you can see, I've shot quite a few images here, and it wasn't my intention to make the prettiest picture possible, but more to create an image that shows off the distortion in the best way possible. And as a consequence, what I've done is picked out probably the most boring angle possible from this set, just purely for the fact that it illustrates the distortion extremely well, and it also will enable me to show you the corrected version extremely well. So we'll go ahead now and get those two images up and start to work on them. Right, so here's my image of choice to illustrate this technique. Now, do you remember in the video I mentioned one of the ways around this linear distortion problem with tall buildings is to move further back and use a slightly longer lens? Well, as I said, that's not always possible, and sometimes you've got a composition in mind and you can only use a wide-angle lens. But in this instance, I did move back. This is the wide-angle shot with a 28mm, quite low down, pointing up, and you can see quite clearly this effect. The base of the church is quite wide, and it tailors off and gets narrower towards the top, and it looks like it's leaning backwards. Now, the other problem with this, what I realised after I shot these images, that this is a very, very old church, and it's probably leaning across anyway. So if you with a modern building, it may be less of a problem, but with this older building, it's probably is leaning quite a bit anyway. So it's quite a difficult one to correct. But but you can see with this wide-angle lens, it is actually leaning backwards on this, and it is wider towards the bottom than it is the top. Now, if you look at this version, which is shot with a 45mm lens, you can see there's less distortion. There's less linear distortion on the building. It does still narrow a little bit towards the top, but it's nowhere near as pronounced as with the wide angle. So always worth if you can, using the slightly longer lens. And what I would do with this is maybe come up, and as I said, if you've got something you can climb on, if there is something like that, then you can climb up and try and remain parallel to the building. That would also help quite a bit, but that's quite a big ask, because we haven't always, as I said, got ladders or walls or whatever to scamper up, but that will help. So what we're going to do is to take this image, our wide angle lens image, and correct it within Photoshop and get it looking a little bit more like this one, with less distortion going on, less linear distortion, and trying to just keep it standing upright a bit more. Right then, so we've opened our image in Photoshop. I'm going to highlight the layer. I'm going to do Command or Control J to duplicate the layer, and then I'm going to go up here to Filter, Distort, and pick out lens correction, and this will bring out quite a big quite a big dialog box. I've actually turned on this grid system. There's a checkbox down here which says show grid, and this will help. You can alter the size of the grid. I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger so it's easier to see, and this is going to help us correct this distortion. And I'm actually going to change the color to something a little bit brighter, like so, and that should help a little bit. Okay, so up here we have various settings, and the one we want is the one that says vertical perspective, and this is the one we're going to use to adjust them and just make the building a little bit more square and sit upright a bit more. So what I'm going to do is basically just drag this down a little bit, like so, and we're going to keep moving this until it looks a little bit more corrected. And there's no exact science to this, just depends on the image. I'm just going to keep pulling that. Obviously, sometimes it's worth going a bit too far and then dragging it back. Now that was starting to look a bit, to me, a bit too top heavy. So I'm just going to drag it back to around there. I think it's about right. And we can turn the preview box off here. That's before, that's after. So already it's made quite a big difference. I actually think that's gone a little bit too far. So I'm just going to drag it back a little bit and just try that again. I think that's just moved. Okay, let's try it there. That's a bit better. Then we can go a little bit more. Okay, let's try that around 28. Okay, looks much better, much more square. Now you'll notice something here is that we've now got a big gap around the canvas. Now, whenever you shoot these type of pictures, like I did in the churchyard, you need to allow bleed around the image, so that if you know you're going to correct it like this, you know you very likely going to have to crop the image down, or certainly do a bit of retouching to add in some more grass on this image. So best thing to do is allow a little bit more bleed around the picture with the intent of doing this, and then at least you know you're not going to crop too tightly into your picture. So once that's done, we can just click OK, and that will now open up in Photoshop. And there we are, it's open in Photoshop. Now what we could have done before going into the lens correction filter was, when we duplicated our background layer, we should have, we don't have to, but we could have converted that to a smart object, and that would have meant we could have just gone back in and made fine adjustments if we needed to. So bear that in mind. So here's our corrected image. Let's just turn this layer off so we can see the before. There's before. There's after, so it's just straightened that up quite nicely. I don't think we were far off there at all. If I turn the background layer off, you can see where our cropping needs to take place. Or the other option is that we go in and we do some retouching and extend the edges here. It's entirely up to you, but it's something that needs to be done. So that's basically the technique. It's very, very simple to do. The only advice I can give you, as I said a bit earlier, when you're shooting these images and you know they're going to be corrected within Photoshop, is just to allow that extra bit of bleed, because if we corrected this a lot further, we would have been cropping into the picture, or we may even, if this is closer up to the top edge, we could have cropped the top of the church off. So bear that in mind, just to allow a little bit more bleed. So using this technique, you're not going to encroach into any important areas of your image. So here are our images again, side by side. This is our original with the wide angle lens. This is the one I've just corrected. As you can see, quite a big difference there. And here's the one we shot with a 45mm lens. So you can see we've come pretty close to that. We've perhaps even taken this a little bit further. Now, before we finish off, I'm just going to show you this image I've been playing around with for the last sort of half an hour, and I just wanted to give this a very kind of infrared, eerie feel to it. And the reason I'm showing you this is the lens correction can also not only correct the image, but you can also use it to create some very kind of unworldly effects. So let me have a go on that one. Here's the before, and here's my subtle corrected adjustment. This is a smart filter, so I'm going to double click on this, and that's going to bring up the image, and we can go back in here to the lens correction and reapply some correction, or not, as the case may be. So what I'm going to do is just go up here and give it some barrel distortion to the image. I can't take it too far because we're getting quite close to the edge of the image there, so that should be about right. And then we can take the vertical perspective and add a bit to that. Again, got to be careful, I'm very close to the edge of the image, haven't got a lot to play with there. Okay, so I've adjusted the vertical perspective and the barrel distortion there, and I can't go much further than that because, as I said, we're going to lose the top of the church. So click OK, and there's our smart object. We'll save that, and that should bring us back out into our layered Photoshop file. And there you can see, if we turn this layer off, this is our smart object. Turn it off and on, you can see we have got quite a bit of a funny distortion there. I haven't gone too far with it because part of the problem is I haven't got a lot of room to play with around the edge of the image. Had I had a bit more sky to play with, I could have perhaps taken this a bit further. But I think that gives you an idea of what you could perhaps do with this filter, not only to correct, but to add some kind of creative effects as well. So get in there and have a play. So there we have it. I hope you enjoyed this short tutorial, and until the next time, thanks for watching. Cheers.